Feel set?
You're good at that.
You know, when people talk about movie sequels that are better than the original, most people seem to jump to movies like Aliens or Terminator 2 or Empire Strikes Back, obviously, and the list goes on, but there's one I always felt that it's not really cited as much for some reason, despite it being hugely popular. Yep, I don't really have a better intro, but hey, it's October, so bring on the horror movies, and you read the title. Today I shall be talking about what is arguably the greatest zombie movie ever made.
Dawn of the Dead is here.
Now, although it is a movie that I don't think requires any real introduction, it did come from the 70s. So f*** it. It is the summer of 78. The sun is shining, the birds are chirping, and people are running out of theaters throwing up after they watch a guy's head blow up amidst a SWAT raid. Charming. Now, I'm not the one for long plot overviews, so I'm just going to keep this short and simple. Dawn of the Dead is about a small group of survivors, going by Stephen, Fran, Roger, and Peter, all of which are searching for a safe haven amidst the zombie apocalypse. Hijinks of all sorts ensue. Yeah, that sounds about right. The movie was made by the late George A. Romero, the father of the zombie genre as we know it. You wouldn't have The Walking Dead without him. The movie was done on a mere budget of $1.5 million and regained a whopping $55 million at the box office, earning critical appraisal from even hard-ass Roger Ebert, gaining a huge following, and the general consensus of it being one of the most compelling and entertaining zombie movies ever made. Do I agree with that? Not really. I mean, I feel more inclined to give that label to its black sheep sequel, Day of the Dead. Probably gonna get some shit for that, but I'm going to say this right now though. Dawn of the Dead is definitely one of those movies that needs to be seen at least once in your lifetime. Sure, it may not be perfect, and it certainly hasn't aged as well as some people make it out to be, but that's not the point. Dawn is a movie that oozes with passion. It has charisma. Apart from that, it's also one of those movies that clearly shows that the cast had a great time during production, and where it may lack in quality acting at times, it makes up for it in visible chemistry. The movie showcases some competent directing, highlighting George's talent, as well as some decent cinematography. However, as for the editing and scoring, this is where most of this video is going to be dedicated to, because, well, simply put, there's an absolute ton of versions out there. Like the supposed Japanese cut that uses the Goblin soundtrack for Suspiria, to the absurd German Super 8 version spanning across 3 8mm rolls, to even the fan bootleg cut that combines every single scene out there in existence into this massive extended mall hours cut. It's quite amazing, honestly. In this video, I'm only going to be talking about the 3 main cuts. The US theatrical Romero cut, the European theatrical Argento cut, and the original director's cut. I will begin this by discussing the Argento cut first, because it kind of makes sense later on when I try to tackle on the other versions. You'll see. For a little bit of backstory behind this cut, back when the movie was first being conceptualized on paper, George was invited by legendary Italian filmmaker Dario Argento, who was known at the time for making giallos. Giallos. Whatever the f*** they're called. Anyways, George was invited to Rome to write the script with him, and after finishing it, the two managed to strike an agreement where Argento would help to fund the film as long as he got distribution and editing rights in Italy and other European countries. Now you may be asking yourselves, what's so different between George Romero's and Dario Argento's visions of Dawn? And the answer to that is simple. Quite different. You see, George's idea was that the movie would play out more like a black comedy, satirizing consumerism at the time, whilst using the zombies merely as a medium for that, allowing him to mess around in both horror and comedy. Now, Dario's take on the movie is a fair bit more simplistic. He simply sets out to make a fast-paced zombie horror. The end result is a movie that is a fair bit darker and more atmospheric than the US version, and with that said, is it necessarily a good thing? Yes and no. In fact, I'm gonna say it right now though, Yeah, bite me, fans, but I prefer the Argento cut over the Romero cut. But don't get your panties in a twist. Despite what I said though, it's not perfect. It's flawed across the board. For one, it drastically reduces the characterization of the four main protagonists, which is a tad unfortunate. The thing that is pretty bad though, is the way Dario has the tendency to remove context. The best way to put it is that there are several occasions throughout the movie where Dario ends up editing out certain bits and pieces that I recall was this.
Steve.
Now, if you're like me, something immediately feels off about this scene. Well, it turns out that in the US version, it plays out like this.
Steven?
Makes more sense now, doesn't it? See, crap like this is what plagues the Argento cut. Another more vivid example of this is how Dario Argento managed to edit one of the most pivotal plot points in the entire movie. Spoilers, there's this fairly large segment where our main protagonists try to block out the zombies from the shopping mall that they're camping out in. Right? Well, it is, except it's not quite obvious in the Argento cut since he literally chopped it in half. So normally the whole bit plays out with the SWAT duo commandeering a pair of trucks, then driving back and forth to get another pair. But of course, since you don't actually see this at all in the Argento cut, we start at the end of this bit.
Like a fucking jar, man, like a fucking jar!
It's really quite strange, and although I do understand that Argento wanted to cut the movie down for time, this was definitely not the way to do it. Another factor I find with rather mixed feelings is the drastic reduction of George's more humorous scenes. I say mixed because I personally don't really find this change particularly negative nor positive, just different. What this leaves you though is a more dreary movie since there aren't as many moments where the tension is diffused with comedy, which I kinda like since that's what I'm looking for anyways in a zombie movie. There is one scene that got removed though that I do kinda have a problem with, and that is the fan favorite helicopter scene. Of course, this actually could have been removed for runtime, but I think the comedic undertone sort of cemented its removal. Now, after tearing the Argento cut a new one, you might be wondering why I think this is the best cut out of the three. And, well, it's simple. It has kickin' music. Now, if you're a fan of Dario Argento, you're probably bound to realize that he frequently collaborates with the Italian prog rock band Goblin in order to score his movies. The same principles apply when it came to Dawn. As such, the movie was fully scored in Italy and European countries with a rock-based soundtrack, and it does a pretty damn good job. Well, for the most part, that is. I also quite enjoy the underlying context of the score with its heavy use of tribal percussions, tying in with George's philosophy of zombies being more like wild animals than actual monsters. Or so I think. I don't know. Critics constantly draw random shit from movies and music, so why can't I? The main theme, L'Alba dei Morti Vivanti, hopefully I didn't screw that up, perfectly captures the chaos of the movie with its eerie choirs and synth pads combined with the repetitive drum beat and bass guitar, and works amazingly in the movie's opening.
Shit's really hit the fan.
How long have you been standing here?
Half of those are inoperative as of now.
Charlie, these are rescue stations. We can't send people to inoperative rescue stations.
We've had old information on the air for the last 12 hours. Doing what I can. These are definite as of now.
There's also the super fast-paced, energetic track titled Zombie, which combines the power of a groovy bass guitar frantic drum beat. And an overlaid choir track. It's a track that gives the movie that momentum it desperately needs at times. I would talk more about each track in the score, but we'd be here all day, so I'm just gonna move on to why this is a double-edged sword. If any of y'all seen Suspiria, do you remember the first time when you heard tracks like Sighs and Witch? And the main theme melody, and you thought to yourself, wow, that's pretty cool. And then you realize that they play the same 3 tracks for almost the entire movie on repeat? Yeah, get used to that feeling. In the Argento cut, you'll probably hear Zombie and a Lacacia played for at least a third of the movie. However, as a whole, I don't think it's too distracting, and I think it's a hell of a lot better than Romero's solution, which I will get to soon enough. Besides, it's not that bad since the movie does actually still have a variety of different incidental tracks for scenes such as the mall overhead segment.
What the hell is it? Looks like a shopping center. One of those big indoor malls.
And the punkish rock track Zaratozo that cues during the finale. In fact, despite my previous complaints about hearing the same tracks over and over again, there's only 2 moments in the entire movie that I feel would require extra unique incidentals. Overall though, the Argento is good, it's fun, and it's all thanks to its great soundtrack and faster pacing. I would give it 4 out of 5 stars. Now then, let's go move on. The US theatrical version and why I don't value it as much. And, well, I just simply don't like the soundtrack. That's all there is to it, really. To put some context to the situation, George Romero has a somewhat unique editing style in which he would fully score his movies amidst the editing phase using stock library music, usually so you can get some sort of tempo or mood for the scene. Now that alone, I can respect that. However, problems soon arise when he starts using that said stock music in the final product. Yeah. Many of the tracks George uses sound incredibly dated and simply doesn't feel as fitting as the Goblin score. The best way to describe many of his tracks is that they work well enough. I say this especially towards the tracks that try to generate suspense, which are some of the cheesiest shit you could hear in existence. There's only one track in the entire movie that does a good job at generating suspense, and it's called Figment's Park. Which I guess got reinterpreted by Goblin under the track Ai Margini della Foira. But you know what? It's not all bad. I mean, for one thing, George does actually spread out a handful of the Goblin cues throughout the movie, albeit not as prolifically as I'd like it to be. Although the stock music has failed in trying to sound thrilling, it does actually succeed in the more satirical and comedic moments. In some moments, the music is actually as good, if not better, than the Goblin score. Clear examples of this to me would be the countryside flyover sequence, The mall montage.
What do you think?
Come on, Joe.
And of course, the all-classic pie fight. But the tracks themselves are only half the story because it also heavily depends on how a scene is edited together. And throughout the movie, there are these moments where faint mall music is inserted in place of action-packed Goblin music, and it works for a completely different reason. There's this one scene where the SWAT duo loads a bunch of items onto a wheelbarrow and rush away. This is what it looks like in the Argento cut. Okay, cool, gets the blood pumping. And this is what it's like in the Romero cut. It's really bizarre because it shouldn't work, but it does. There's also these moments where George manages to hack together some quite interesting creations when it comes to the music. I mean, for example, he manages to take the kick drum pattern from the main theme and loop it as an underlying beat throughout the movie in certain scenes, such as in the opening.
I tried to explain this to you several times.
The guys in the crew are going crazy. A couple of them flown the coop already. I don't know how long we're gonna stay on the air.
Another great example would be when, spoiler, zombified Steven shows up for the first time. Just one thing though. Just one teeny little thing. George is just as inconsistent as Dario. Although George doesn't try to shorten the movie to the point of it being borderline incomprehensible, he shares the uncanny ability in being able to make certain scenes just feel off. And I think it all comes down to one simple variable: George's lack of subtlety.
And I like a lot of sound. I hate dead air. I'll always use some kind of an ambience and a lot of music, which is just all form stuff. Some people say that my tracks are too driving or too full, but that's just personal preference, you know.
That clip alone perfectly sums up George's issue. In many scenes, George displays an inability to edit scenes without any added music, which is a damn shame since this wouldn't be a problem if he actually had an actual composer, which is probably why it's not a problem in his later movies. However, that's not the case here because all he's got to work with are either from the plethora of DeWolf library tracks or the small handful of Goblin tracks. As a result, there are many scenes where the music becomes way too lush for its own good. George also seems to fail at exactly where to put some of the Goblin tracks. Although I don't have a huge problem with some of the main tracks, since they work well enough with the visuals, but he does seem to misplace his priorities when it comes to at least the stingers. Like seriously, when it comes to the Goblin stingers, I really do not understand his mindset. He manages to play it at fitting moments, play it at unnecessary moments,
Our responsibility is finished.
and yet somehow manages to fail to cue them at times where the scenes are simply meant to be. mean, to be fair, the scene does play out rather differently between the two cuts, which is why I've prepared a second scene for comparison. Roll it. As a whole though, I'd give this 3.5 stars, since even though I have mixed feelings about the cut overall, it does manage to tell the story better than the Argento version given the extra 8 minutes of footage. Now, this leaves us with our third and final cut of the day, the original director's cut. Oh boy, where do I begin with this monstrosity?
I saw some of the stuff being shot, but the scenes, but when he put it together, it was, I was riveted to the scene. I couldn't believe it, you know. Yeah, it was pretty powerful. Definitely not boring.
Are you sure about that?
When the movie first premiered in 1978 at the Cannes Film Festival, it was done before George could be able to produce a final cut. As a result, he managed to just hash together a quick rough cut that runs at 2 hours and 19 minutes, leaving audiences with what he officially states as his non-preferred cut, and with good reason. This cut is an absolute clusterfuck. They only used the Goblin music 5 times. I counted 5 times the entire movie, without any Goblin stingers even. So, you know what that means. I cannot overstate just how awful I found most of the De Wolf tracks to be. It managed to make even the finale feel underwhelming. Like, how the hell do you manage to accomplish the feat of making a biker gang assault armed with guns and mean fucking evil weaponry feel so goddamn boring? I don't understand it. Now, considering how awful I find this cut and how close I am to actually burning my copy, you might be wondering what's actually worthwhile in it. Although this cut manages to royally f up everything else, its saving grace is the fact that it showcases many scenes that help add to the story. You get extra scenes that give our protagonists more depth and personality. You get extra scenes that add to the comedic and satirical overtones of the movie, which is something I genuinely don't really mind in seeing. And you get extra scenes of plot deliberation, which I find is a welcome addition since it gives the movie a more tactical feel, which is probably one of the best additions since it actually makes Peter and Roger like actual SWAT members.
It's Christmas time down there, buddy.
That city, brother. How are we gonna work it?
We get into one of the department stores up here. They probably have their own escalators inside.
Let's check those keys.
But there's one scene in the entire movie that I think makes this cut worth viewing at least once, and that's the extended police doc segment, because we got to see Joseph Pilato. Yeah, that's right, the anthropomorphic hand grenade, Captain Rhodes, is now a threatening police officer, and I fucking love it. Since not only does it show how menacing he can be even back before he even took on the role.
Those men were already dead. Now, you were here, you know that.
GON Traffic Watch. Steve Andrews.
That's me, I'm Steve Andrews.
Yeah, no shit.
But it's even better when you have the joking headcanon that he's Rhodes before assuming military power.
Now, it'd be crazy to start shooting at one another, wouldn't it? Sure would.
Yeah, it's dumb, but hey, if it makes the cut more tolerable, then hey-o. Wrapping this up though, I'd give this cut a mere 3 stars because as much as I like some of the additional scenes, it seriously needs a good trimming. So now comes the biggest question in this entire video though. Which cut should you see? And well, that's easy. All of them. Hooray. Although I painted the latter 2 cuts in this video as inferior in my opinion, those are merely just my opinions. So I guess the main takeaway of all of this is that any version of Dawn will do, honestly. Dawn of the Dead is one of those movies where arguably every cut can be considered the best for their own merits. It all matters on one's expectations and personal preference. Because of this, I would suggest it'd be a good idea to check out the US theatrical cut first, since it's the cut George himself considered being the best. Just make sure it's not Zack Snyder's hot mess.
Holy shit.
They're after us. They know we're still in here. They're after the place. They don't know why. They just remember. Remember that they want to be in here. They're us, that's all. There's no more room in hell. What? Something my granddaddy used to tell us. You know Macumba? Voodoo. Granddad was a priest in Trinidad. He used to tell us, when there's no more room in hell,